And welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. We are ready for Chapter 5 of Henry Barrie, Vimy Ridge Survivor, entitled Training in Canada. By the left, quick, march! As Henry marched forward with the rest of the 130th Battalion, he thought about how disappointed he had become. It was now August, and Henry had spent the last 5 months marching around the horrid field, turning to the right and marching back, over and over, 2 times a day. Every morning they had to get up, eat their breakfast, and get ready for inspection. After inspection, they would fall in for parade and be inspected again. They would march for hours and then stop for lunch. In the afternoon, they would go to the shooting range and practice their marksmanship on straw bales 20 feet away. Henry noted with pride he tended to do well in target practice, rarely missing the bale. However, he noticed that Jimmy was really struggling. He would rarely talk now and didn't seem to have the strength to march all day and then fire his rifle. When they would practice throwing the Mills bombs into a pit in the middle of the field, Jimmy tended to miss a lot. And then when they would go back to the parade field and march again, Jimmy kept getting singled out for not being in formation. Finally, supper would come and an hour of leisure time. Henry and Jimmy tended to play cards with the guys in the barrack and talk about what they were missing back home. I can't believe I'm missing the turkey harvest this year, Henry said. I wonder how Pa, Tom, and Rankin are going to handle it without me there. I know. It's the best part of the year. And the feast afterwards. The turkey, the cranberries, the dumpling, the buns, and the pies. Oh, how I miss the pies, Jimmy said with a sigh. It's always the same here. Pork or beef with some veggies. Well, at least we're not eating porridge every day, Henry said. I do miss the fish, though. Lights out in minutes. Last post. As the men started getting ready for bed, the lance corporal went on to say, You're getting 14 days of leave starting tomorrow. If you want to go home to see your family, there's a train leaving in the morning. You should say your goodbyes because we're headed overseas as soon as you get back. The lance corporal went on to say, Remember, though, 14 days. 1 day to get home, 12 days to say goodbye, and 1 day to get back. If you aren't back, you will be considered AWOL and you will receive field punishment. That means you will be arrested, put in jail, and fined. Make sure you are back. The next morning, Henry and Jimmy boarded the train headed to Kingston and were talking about what the lance corporal said. Henry, are you going to be back in 14 days? I'm thinking that just isn't long enough, and I don't care about the punishment. We've been in this camp for 5 months and haven't seen anything else, and I miss my folks. I'm thinking about spending an extra week with them. You don't want to do that, Jimmy. We will be there for the turkey harvest. We're soldiers and are expected to be back in 14 days, Henry said. Jimmy nodded and said, Okay, I'll do the same thing. After riding the train to Kingston and back up to Perth, Henry and Jimmy hitched a ride and rode up to Lanark, where Jimmy said, See you here next Monday, Henry? Absolutely, replied Henry. Henry continued riding the old familiar trail to Watson's Corners and his home, thinking about what changes he might see. How tall would Rankin and the girls be now? Did Pa build any new buildings? Or maybe Ma had gray hairs now with all her worry. And was Nettie as beautiful as she had always been? As he turned into the lane, he heard Rena yell, He's here! He is here! He was greeted by his entire family rushing out of the house. He hopped off his horse and went to see them. He was hugged by all his sisters at once and then Ma. His Pa came up with a big smile, a hearty handshake. Tom was as tall as Pa and Rankin just behind him. And they were all speaking at the same time. We heard the lads were coming home. Oh my, you've lost weight. You look tired. Are you hungry? Henry smiled at all of them and said, Yes, I'm famished. I haven't eaten all day. As they all gathered around the dinner table, Henry told them all about Kingston, the train ride, and the camp. Even Pa shook his head in amazement. Sounds like you're definitely having an adventure, Henry. I always wondered what Brockville and the St. Lawrence River were like, Pa said. But are you remembering to say your prayers before meals and bedtime? Ma asked. You know that's important. Yes, Ma. I read my Bible every night and always say my prayers. I know God is watching out for me. So how long are you here for? Pa said. Well, I was told because I had done so well in training, they're giving me 12 days. I thought I would be able to help with the turkey harvest, Henry replied. Jimmy has the same 12 days, so we'll go back together. And do you know when you go to England? Susan asked. As soon as I get back, Henry said. I'm told as long as any letters or packages are addressed to number 787 129, Private Henry Barrie, it will get to me. I don't know where in England the 130th is going to be. Pa said, well, we're certainly happy to have you. Wesley and his family are coming over to help with the harvest, and Tom and Rankin are certainly big helps. We could always use the extra hands. Henry found the week passed way too quick, and suddenly it was Friday. The family gathered up all the turkeys except the tom and 3 hens and put them into the cages. After loading up the wagon and hitching the oxen, the Barries headed for Watson's Corners grounds with Wesley and his family right behind. When they arrived at the rectangular grounds, Henry saw what at first seemed like complete chaos. There were tents with people selling everything you could think of. Hundreds of caged turkeys, all squawking and chirping. Lines of chopping blocks in the middle of the grinding stones beside them. And people sitting in a circle pulling feathers out of the dead turkeys and stuffing burlap sacks full. There were children all running around, mothers getting quilts out to lay on the ground, and fathers sharpening axes, and neighbors talking about how the year went. Henry looked around and spied Nettie and her family in the northwest corner of the grounds and went over to greet her family. Henry said, hello, Mr. Davidson. You have some good-looking turkeys there. Thank you, Henry. How are you keeping? Well, sir, thank you for asking, replied Henry as Nettie stood. Hi, Nettie. Henry, I heard you were back in town. It's good to see you, Nettie said shyly. It's good to see you too. How are you keeping, Nettie? Good. You look like you've lost weight, Henry. Are they feeding you enough? Henry replied, oh, yes. They've been working us really hard to get us in shape. I'm thinking I'm stronger now than I've ever been. Nettie asked, what are they having you do, Henry? Well, after breakfast, we have to clean our bunk, uniform, and equipment every morning and then get inspected. Then we march around a lot. Lunch is next, so we practice something in the afternoon, then march a bit again before supper. After supper, I relax with the guys before reading my Bible, saying my prayers, and getting ready for bed. Normally, I'm pretty tired by then, Henry said. Nettie replied, it sounds really hard. Are you able to do it all right? Henry answered, oh, yes, I can do it all right. Jimmy struggles with it a bit. The hardest part, though, is being away from home and, well, you. Nettie blushed and said, I've missed you too. Oh, Nettie, I've missed you. I'm leaving for England next week. I'll write every week, okay? Will you write me every week? Okay, Henry. I'm not very good at writing, but I'll try. Goodbye, Nettie. Goodbye, Henry. As Henry made his way back across the grounds to his family, he thought to himself, I can't believe I'm going to miss this place. I can't imagine what it would be like if I wasn't with Nettie and Jimmy. Hopefully, we won't be too long. So in this chapter, we're kind of leading up to the action within the war itself and giving a little bit of background of what it was like during this time. As you can tell, Henry was in training at Valcartier camp for almost 6 months, and that's basically all they did. The main reason they were there was because at the time, there was some discussions as to how the Canadians were going to support over in uh, England and France. And England at that time, number one, didn't feel like the Canadians could do much to help they weren't seen as being professional soldiers, and so there was some concern about even bringing the recruits in. And then the thought was that they would just be added in with the English troops so that they could learn how to be proper soldiers. And the Canadian government and Sam Hughes in particular were very insistent that the Canadian battalions needed to be kept as Canadian battalions. And that was a discussion that went on through the war. And it wasn't until later that the Canadian troops really were kept together as their own battalions. But here at the beginning, as Henry and Jimmy are getting ready to go, once again, they're going to get over to England and discover that things were not quite as they were. The turkey harvest that they're talking about was an annual event that happened in Watson's Corners every year. And it's similar to things that you see on the farms today where groups of people will gather together during chicken harvest time. When the birds are needing to be defeathered and all of that, when you have a large group of individuals working together on that, it actually makes the work go much quicker. And so that's really what the turkey harvest was about. Is everyone kind of had their own jobs, and there was a little bit of an assembly line or factory set up to it. And so that's why everyone was gathered there during that time. So tomorrow we're going to be looking at chapter 6 as Henry and Jimmy start to make their way to England, and they will go on a boat for the first time.